Why is sight reading always left out, and what do we need to learn before we can sight read fluently? It is often forgot about, and it's actually been ages since we last covered it on the channel. So the question is, have you set up your foundation, your reading, and your practice and resources in the best possible way to improve your sight reading? If you aren't actively improving this, it's likely holding your reading and your playing back. Last week we talked about how the score can slow you down, and we focused on reading less. But that lesson wasn't really about reading at all, it was about memory and how you can get stuck in the score and never finish the pieces that are pushing your level. We have pieces that we are learning to push our level, and we also have our sight reading ability, which usually sits a few levels below this. This is sometimes a better indication of our current level, and we will touch on why later. But first, let's jump into the foundations of sight reading. Okay, so what do you need if you want to sight read? Remember, this is reading. We are taking information off the page and we are using it to find where our fingers are on the piano, and we are reading from left to right. If you wanted to slow someone's reading down dramatically, music or words, you tell them to look away every few seconds. And that's exactly what we do when we're sight reading. We look at the page and then we look down at our hands, and then we do that pattern over and over again. There are only 4 reasons though why you'd need to look at your hands, and only one of them applies to sight reading. First, you're learning where your hands are on the piano as a beginner. The second, at a more advanced level, you're checking how efficiently your fingers and your hands are moving across the piano. This is of course not a priority when you're sight reading. Third, you are looking to memorize the pattern on the keyboard. Again, we're not going to be doing this when we're sight reading. And fourth, you have a big jump. If that's the case, it's a really quick glance that you do just with your eyes down to the keyboard, and then your eyes are straight back on the score. Now you know that you shouldn't really be looking at your hands. If you've been looking at them up to this point, I understand, and the advice of don't look isn't necessarily the most helpful on its own. We need a simple framework to help you play without looking in a way that's reliable. One of the core ways that we learn to play the piano, and a method that we can revisit when we're learning to sight read, is to use a 5-finger position. That is 5 fingers over 5 notes. Make sure that you can control these notes without looking. If you're at a more advanced level and you're used to watching your hands, then it's worth revisiting this foundational level. So this is how many method books begin, and the grade exams actually follow a similar path. We start in a 5-finger position, and then we slowly begin to move our thumbs outwards, and we extend our position, keeping our 2, 3, 4, 5 the same, and just extending our thumbs. Again, we want to do this without looking, and the way that we achieve this is by using feel. If you find that you're always checking your hands, the solution is to play by feel. This is the thing that you need to learn before you can really start to improve your sight reading. There are a few things that you can feel on the piano. One is the gaps between the white keys. When you first start moving your thumbs, feel those little, I call them train track gaps between each note. If you're still learning this, it's fine to glance down occasionally and check, but try to be guided more by sound and more by feel rather than by how it looks. As you progress, get used to playing without looking, using the black keys as landmarks so that you always know where you are on the keyboard. If you can feel the black keys on the sides of your fingers as you move around, then you will never need to look. Another helpful idea is to use anchor notes. Anchor notes are simply notes that you pivot around. You could call them pivot notes, but I like to call them anchor notes. So you anchor yourself on that note and then you move around it. Always know where that note is. So this is your foundation, using feel in your position, 5 fingers over 5 notes, moving the thumb, and then using anchor notes. The next part of the foundation is scales and arpeggios. There's no way around this. Scales and arpeggios are patterns, which you can think of as words and notes as individual letters. If you can recognize a scale in a piece of music and you instinctively know the fingering, It's far easier than working out every single note. They're also vital for thinking in keys. If I'm in the key of B major, I'm thinking around the scale of B major. So next comes arpeggios and chords. So when you're practicing arpeggios, take a moment to think through the theory. What's the arpeggio? What are the notes that you're using? And what are the chords that you can form from this arpeggio? Something that's really useful to practice is broken chords. Think about how the shapes look on the music and how the shapes look on the piano of the root position, the first inversion, and the second inversion as well. This is your vocabulary. And to speed up your sight reading, we must move from reading individual notes to reading shapes and chords. Think of words, not letters. Since we've touched on theory, remember that this is also a core foundation. It'll improve your sight reading as your general musical knowledge improves. There are more conventions and rules in how we write music than you might expect, and they make reading music easier. You can see that we're covering a range of topics, and this is why sight reading is such a good indicator of your overall playing ability and knowledge. There's a lot to cover, which is exactly why in coaching we are working through these 30-day focus areas. You choose your weakest link and you just focus on that for the month. Next, let's talk about reading. So patterns are great, but there's no getting around needing to know your notes and needing to be able to recognize them really quickly off the score. Usually, we first learn the notes in the pieces that are pushing our level, these new notes, and then we encounter the same ones as we are sight reading. If you're not fluent with them yet though, there are 3 main ways that you can improve your note recognition. So the first thing you can do is use theory worksheets, and there are so many of them. You basically write them out. A good example would be ABRSM Discovering Music Theory. Their series does include sections on note recognition up to a point. Second, use a flashcard app and adjust it to your level. We keep encountering higher and higher notes even into an advanced level with more and more ledger lines. There's always something that we can practice, and one option is the music tutor app, although I understand that there are many others as well. So the third thing that we can do is lots and lots of reading, and we'll come back to how in just a moment. Up to now, we've focused on areas that primarily require a lot of input, a lot of time, memorizing notes, memorizing patterns. But next comes your strategy or your process, when you actually sit down to sight read. And there are 2 main parts to this. The first is looking ahead. It isn't something that we typically do when we're reading words, say, but in music, your eyes need to be slightly ahead of where you're playing. That could be 1 beat, 2 beats, or even a whole bar. To begin with, I would aim for 1 beat. And it feels uncomfortable to begin with, and it certainly doesn't come naturally to most people. But once it clicks, it will improve your fluency dramatically. The second part to our strategy is to keep going. The start point is A and your end point is B, and you need to travel from A to B without going backwards or without starting again. This is so much easier said than done. Now with the piece in front of us, let's consider 2 ways that we can approach our sight reading. The first is to go from A to B without stopping, tolerate any mistakes, and just focus on getting to the end. The second way is to go through the piece slowly, basically do the opposite. Don't worry about flow or looking ahead, just aim for accuracy on every note. Take your time, break the rule and look at your hands and make sure that every finger is playing the correct note and it's over the correct note before it plays. The first approach tolerates mistakes but aims for fluency. The second approach aims for accuracy and trains the fingers to play correctly, but it isn't fluent. In both cases, you should only go forwards. Keep going from A to B without jumping back to the start. The final part to our reading section is pulse and rhythm. When I talk about fluency, I'm really talking about an even pulse and accurate rhythms. Most of rhythm can and should be learned away from the piano. This is how you build a rhythm vocabulary, as I call it. You don't have time to work out your rhythms when you're actively sight reading. You need to be able to recognize them, pull them from your vocabulary and reproduce them. This doesn't mean not counting. You count the main beats and you insert the learned patterns into these beats. So become highly familiar and fluent with rhythms before you start to sight read them. And we'll revisit how to do that in just a moment. So we have built up our foundation and we've improved our reading. So it's now time to practice, but how? Before we jump into that, if you'd like more structure in your playing, you'd like to know exactly what to do when you sit at the piano to practice, check out my 60-minute practice routine, which will guide you through your practice. You'll know exactly what to do, and it's available from the link in the description below. Okay, so there are a couple of methods that you can use to practice sight reading, and one approach that I highly recommend, which isn't perfect, but it is excellent for practicing many of the elements that we've discussed, such as 5-finger positions and rhythms, and building up from here, is to use a method book, like Paul Harris's Guide to Sight Reading. So this series accompanies the piano grade exams, so it's easy to find your level. They are progressive, not only through the series, but within each book, gradually introducing new keys, new concepts, and rhythm exercises as well as you go. They're also really useful for practicing rhythm separately from playing, and they make it easy to know exactly where your level sits. With these books, I suggest working through each one at least twice unless you're finding it really easy. And sometimes after completing the book once or twice, you may still find it challenging. At that point, it's actually worth moving on, pushing your grade to the next level. And often that's actually what's required to make progress. And then the previous grade will start to seem a little bit easier. This leads us onto our second option. Use what you already have at home or borrow from a local library. I love piano anthologies, collections of music with a variety of styles and our favorite composers. So this is really where I started sight reading by accident. I would flick through, find pieces around about my level, and if I'm honest, I wouldn't always finish them because you just hit a hard section halfway through. That is the downside to this approach. It's hard to find a single book where pieces are consistently at your level, unless you use old grade books. It won't be especially methodical or progressive, but the pieces are often really great. So the solution is to use a combination of both of these strategies. If this seems like a lot, just keep it simple. Learn at your level. You don't need to know every rhythm and every scale, just the ones that you're working on now, and they will strengthen your sight reading. So now that you know how to sight read or how to approach your sight reading learning, here's why you should stop reading music altogether and how it's going to help you to finish pieces.